Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Mana on the Rocks. It's I, Joe. Today, we have Atlas.
Hello, everybody.
This week, we are talking about one of the most fundamental skills a Magic player can possibly have. No, that's not choosing to play the blue deck. That's cringe. We like being cringe here. No, it's mulligan decisions. Figuring out your starting hand has a critical role on how the game is going to play out and your role in the game. And that's largely what we talk about. Get into a few fun tangents here and there. But speaking of tangents, Atlas, what do we got on the docket for your announcements?
It's announcement time, everybody. Okay, so once again, I don't think there's a whole lot that's coming up, but we do have a couple of events that we're going to be playing at. Next one is going to be CEDH's Fall Brawl. That's going to be up in Issaquah, Washington on the 7th of October, so a very, very short week and a half away. We're basically there at this point.
That's insane.
Yeah, if you haven't already, sign up. There are still some slots left, but the event does cap at 60 players, so make sure that you hurry up and register. It's going to be a really good time. We're going to have a lot of really talented players. It's going to be a lot of really good games. You'll be able to, of course, see myself and Joe there, so we'll be looking forward to playing with you if you do happen to come. And then the next event following that, it's the next month, but November 4th, Gabby's Olympic Cards and Comics is having their next OCCS, which is the Olympic Commander Challenger Series. That's our local store. It's their quarterly event for competitive Commander, and for the first time ever, the shop is allowing 10 proxies per deck.
Let's go.
So that is a huge step. We're really excited. Hopefully it serves to at least crack the format open to a couple more players, and then maybe we can make even more progress in the future. But that's going to be really exciting. The turnout there is always pretty good. The competition is, of course, fierce. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And then just 2 weeks after that, on the 18th and 19th of November, once again, mark your calendars, and you're definitely going to want to be at this. It is PDX's first ever Pacific Northwest Regional Championship for Commander. So that group, PDX Commander, has set up a regional championship circuit that has since concluded, and there are a bunch of players who were able to qualify and get their tickets paid for just by winning the smaller events. It is a $60 entry fee, I believe, for the event that's going to be held in Graham, Washington, and that's going to be 100-player cap. So very large event for the Pacific Northwest. I don't think I've seen one of this size in a while, probably since like Marchesa back in like 2021. So that's
correct. Yeah, this will be the largest tournament since Marchesa.
It's gonna be huge. It's gonna be exciting.
God,
it's gonna be awesome.
That tournament had so many ripple effects throughout the entire community.
Yeah, it really helped set the stage and move up competitive Commander as a tournament scene. So that's gonna be super exciting. From what I understand, this regional circuit is gonna be a thing that continues in the future. So you're definitely gonna want to be able to say that you participated in the first one. So go ahead and register for that. It's gonna be a really good time. I'll be there. I think Joe's trying to make it. We're gonna have a bunch of other really good players from all over the Pacific Northwest who are coming to rep their stores and their skills and their favorite commanders. So it's gonna be a really good time. Lastly, this announcement is to plug our Discord channel that we've set up, the Mana on the Rocks.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah. So thank you, Joe, and our friend Christian, who's our other mod, and they've helped set up the server. But actually, on that note, if you hop in the server, you're actually going to be able to help us decide on topics for episodes. There's a submissions channel, and so we've been having some dialogue with people, and I would actually like to thank Owl Deer for their submission, saying they'd like to hear more about mulligans, and since that's what this episode is about, thank you, Owl Deer, for your idea. It was a fantastic topic, and we had a really good time discussing it. But other than that, I think we're just about ready to go.
We are just about ready. However, speaking of the Discord, we did launch a Patreon last week. One of the things I said we would do is we would shout out a fantastic random patron. I want to shout out Justin, first patron. Figured we'd give him a little shout out. Appreciate you, buddy. Love you. Love that you're supporting us. You should come on down. Get a drink with us. Mulligans!
Mulligans!
Mulligans! Right. Mulligans. Mulligan. That was a golf term, right? initially.
I think so. I think maybe.
I feel like that started out as a golf term, or I
I
was told it was a golf term.
Don't quote me on that though. Like historical significance, I don't feel comfortable saying for certain that it was.
Okay.
But it seems like it.
Okay, so I have you on record saying, yeah, I don't know what a mulligan is.
That is correct. I'm still figuring that out.
Okay, that's valid. Yeah, mulligans. Probably the best mulligan I think in most Magic right now exists in Commander, just because our first mulligan's free. Like we get to just see 14 cards for free.
Well, let's start with the fun fact. For any of our listeners, did y'all know that it doesn't matter what format of Magic you're playing, if you have more than one opponent, you get a free mulligan according to the rules.
That is true.
Yep, that is correct. You do not have to pitch down from 7 to 6 if you have more than one opponent, even if you're playing 60 card, whatever, battle royale or anything like that. That's just literally written into the rules. That said, there are no formats other than Commander where that usually comes up, like with any like seriousness.
Yeah, there's not really like a 3-person Magic format that I know that's popular.
Or 4-person, like 60 card, like anything other than Commander, right? Like
Yeah,
at that point,
Commander.
It's just like you're playing friendlies, like battle royale with your friends or whatever. And it's
like custom rule sets and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not quite as serious.
Yeah, learning to wield the mulligan in Commander is such a big thing. It's so huge. Like it's one of the like most direct ways that you can influence and like improve your game. I feel, at least for me, making sure I mulligan more. Like not even just like thinking through differently. Just like, nope, I don't want this hand. Just get it out of here. Like have that be my first thought has already improved my gameplay.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the hardest things to get your head around. When you're like trying to level up your gameplay is the fact that it's okay to go down below 7 to start the game below 7 cards. Because I feel like people who may start Magic, they come from a 60 card format. It feels so bad if you're going down below 7, which a lot of times you have to. You have to go to 6 or even 5 sometimes. It's just truly unplayable before that. But you feel like you're so lost. Like the game is already over. You might stand a chance, but the game is just, you're so far behind because you don't have the options that your one other opponent does, and they just have to outvalue, right? If you end up with no cards in hand, they're gonna win.
Yeah, the card advantage is just gonna overwhelm your opponent. Like the amount of times that I have like felt decent on 5 against my opponent's like snap keep 7 in 1v1, very few times, very few times. And honestly, it most likely ends up, or the times that I've won those games have mostly been because of critical misplay, less so because of like, oh, my 5 cards were just gods here and they had 7 medium cards. Like that doesn't happen often.
Yeah, not really, especially with like multiple copies of cards and like the redundancy factor, right? It's just a lot easier to draw into what you need, and then if they're on 7, they're going to draw into even more of what they need because they have fewer cards in their deck. So it's just, yeah, definitely. But in Commander,
it's
different. Feels a lot better. Feels a lot better to go to 5.
Yeah, that's the weird thing to me is like once I started like making the conscious decision to mulligan just more, and once again, more, not sculpting, whatever, you realize that like, oh, going to 6 is functionally free.
Yes, more or less. Like you get your first actually free mulligan, right? And that's awesome. Like you see a first 7 and you're like, I'm not sure about this, throw it back.
Yeah.
Basically just throw it back. It's free. That's why they call it that. But then after that, you even going to 6, you're like this 7 seems okay, but like I'm in 3rd seat. I want something a little more aggressive. There's no fast mana. I'll go to 5. Like see if I can get at least a draw entry or something. Maybe like stumble upon a Mystic Remora on turn 1
or route to a dock side or something.
Something useful. And then even at 6, like I know that this is for me, like going below 6 is the hard part now. It's like I see these 6 and I'm like, this is like okay, like this card's really good, and sometimes it's even like, man, this hand is like, I would consider this unplayable if I were at first or even second 7, but I don't only go to 5 cards in hand. And it's like, no, you get to see 7 cards every time. You just throw those cards back, and then you select the best 5 cards out of the next 7 you see.
And you draw a card on your first turn.
And you draw a card. So functionally you're starting with 6, even though one of them is blank. Yeah, it's just, it's a very different just way of looking at it compared to 60, where like, because there are 100 card singletons, like there are so many different permutations of opening hands, especially with all the fast mana and stuff, that make hands just not even playable, but actively good from just like even 4 cards that you might start with. And even if you're keeping a hand of 4, that you get an extra blank card. You start with 5 in your hand, even if you're only holding 4 at the beginning of the game. So it's a really interesting dynamic. I would say that I feel like I've lost to more opponents who mulligan to 4 than I have to opponents who mulligan to like 6 or 5. Like, and that's just because they see enough cards and they know what their deck does, and they're like, all right, these 7 cards, these are the 4 best cards, and these are going to get me what I want to do this game. So I'm going to keep these 4. It's really interesting, really interesting.
Yeah, and I think I heard it explained once that like if you mull to 6, you functionally have a conspiracy that says look at the top 21, choose 6 of them, and it's like, yeah, everyone would play that, obviously. Why not?
Yes. Yeah.
It's so good.
That's a great way of saying it. What the heck?
Yeah, I forget where I heard it from. I think it was on like an old like Playing with Power podcast episode or something like that. And I heard that, I'm like, oh yeah, that is kind of true. And then I proceed to like not mulligan for like 6 months straight. So like, nah, these hands are great, but I'm playing Rakdos Jank, so I have to keep better hands. No, absolutely. And like before we even get to like the minutia of like figuring out like, oh, my hand like leads to this thing that's gonna be really good to stop here. Like, what do you look for in a hand, broadly speaking? I guess we'll start with like first or second position, because I feel like seat 1, seat 2, your hands change dramatically from if you're going seat 3, seat 3, and absolutely seat 4.
I don't know if that's true, at least for me.
Really?
So
okay.
The way that I classify cards in my head, it's like obviously you have like instants, you have tutors, blah 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 blah, like, all those things. But when I'm mulliganing, I classify cards a little bit differently in my head. I think about it as lands, ramp, and action. Or yeah, and action. I guess lands are ramp when I'm thinking. Sorry, I'm trying to break it apart in my head here, but I guess it's like it's ramp, action, and interaction. Those are the 3 categories that I think are probably like the best way to describe the way that I look at hands when I'm mulliganing. And lands fall into ramp because they produce you mana. Basically, anything that's going to produce mana is ramp. Whether it's fast mana or a dork or anything like that or not, it's ramp. And then there's interaction, which can be anything from a counterspell to a removal spell to even a stacks piece. And then action, which could be a tutor, it could be a draw engine, it could be like a combo piece. It just kind of depends on like what the deck is. It could even be a wheel if you're playing wheels. If you have like a really early wheel, that could be a piece of action. But those are the 3 categories in my hand, and I try to, at least in seat 1 and seat 2, my hands always have to have action in them. If I'm not keeping a hand with action, there's got to be a very, very specific reason why. If I'm in seat 1 or 2,
yeah.
And then in seats 3 and 4, I'm still looking for action, but depending on the pod I'm in, I might be a little bit more leaning towards interaction, or even because my deck is Kenrith, like even just ramp. If I have a deck with a lot of, or not a deck, a hand with a lot of ramp in it, and I'm in seat 3 or 4, and I have like 1 solid piece of interaction, I might even just keep that hand, depending on like what mulligan I'm on and what seat I'm in, just because my commander can technically be action. Like if I get to 5 mana, then I have 4 on the next turn, I can start drawing cards, which is not great. It's a really slow draw engine, but it is a draw engine, and so it can be considered action.
True. And I think the way that you have postured yourself and like position yourself, like even just like having a Kenrith and literal nothing in your hand will cause the game to shift to some capacity. Like there is a meaningful action and change that happens when you go, I am casting Kenrith the Return.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I think a lot of commanders have that same impact on the game, like depending on what they do. Like obviously most lists Rograk isn't gonna do.
He's there to enable stuff.
Yeah, it'll be like, okay, so casting Rograk obviously because it's free, blah 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 blah. They're gonna make some mana off of it, or they're gonna use it to turn on their Mox Amber or something like that. Their SWAT's available now, so it's a little bit like fine or whatever. Versus like if someone goes like Thrasios, that's gonna have a definite impact on the game. As soon as Tivit hits the stack, that has an impact on the game. I think also going back to Rograk, because that card is so weird. I think that there's also like this weird dynamic where in Rograk poly lists, like whether it's Teamer Rograk poly or like Trog or something like that, it's like if that's one of the times where if Rograk goes onto the battlefield, well, now that's altering the way I'm playing because I'm holding up. If I see me and then Trog, I might be holding up like a Bowmasters that I can cast on turn 1, or like a counter spell, or so like some removal spell for Rograk, so that as soon as they put their polymorph on the stack, kill that little goblin bitch boy, because fuck him.
Little bitch boy Rograk over here. He's so small though. He's so
I hate that card.
He's a funny card. I think he does funny things.
He does very funny things. I hate him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's definitely a hallmark of like having like just a good commander, is like by the time that people are considering it coming out, like it's going to change the course of things.
Absolutely.
Because like you said, like I think Thrasios decks specifically, and your list to an extent, because you have a mana sink in the command zone, you are allowed to keep those. Just I have mana. What is my game plan? Mana. That's the game. We'll worry about everything else afterwards, but right now we're playing mana. That's what we're doing.
I won a game just the other day because I was in 3rd seat. I kept a hand that was like, it was just a lot of mana and like 1 counter spell. It was like, I think it was like a mana dork, 3 lands, like an offer you can't refuse, and maybe an Esper Sentinel, maybe. I think I had one more creature because one of my lands was Geist.
Oh,
and I was just like, this hand is a lot of mana, and we'll just cast a Kenrith and counter someone's win attempt on our way to casting Kenrith, and then it just made so much mana. I was like, all right, this will win us.
That's the value of having a outlet in the command zone, a la Thrasios, a la Kenrith, or anything like that, because though you're able to create those games where you can pseudo bluff that you have stuff going on, and then just do the control thing where you're like, oh cool, I didn't need to do anything, I'm going to draw my card and untap now. And that's just a really powerful thing for any deck to be able to like tap into its toolbox, really. And I think I would classify a lot of my hands pretty similarly. I generally switch like action for like game plan. Like, okay, like this hand is doing this. Do I think like casting Warnog early is useful? Do I think, trying to rush my win attempt is good here? Do I think does this hand have like mana plus way to get to like a stacks creature? Like how fast can I get to Dalthy? How fast can I get to like Drannith Magistrate or Opposition Agent or like stuff like that? I view it more in terms of game plan rather than singular action. But apart from that, I view hands pretty similarly. Like I want something to stop someone or a way to get there, and I want something that I want to be doing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good that's just a great idea in general. Is like be able to, ideally you want all 3. You want some amount of ramps, you want some amount of interaction, and you want some amount of action. I think like the old diagrams classically was like 2 lands, 1 to 2 pieces of fast mana, interaction, and like a tutor. Or it's like an quote unquote ideal hand from the old diagrams.
That's a great hand.
When Cedh started. Like those are really good examples. I think for me, I don't really game plan. I do consider like, what is this hand telling me to do? But I think for me, it's a lot more flexible because just the way that I play the game is less focused on, all right, what do my cards tell me? Like, what is my hand telling me to do? And like, what can I like? How can I use these cards in different situations? Like, what role do I need to be filling in this spot? Like, for example, I just picked up. I'm starting to play Grixis now. I know. I honestly, I am a hater still, and I dislike myself. But it is fun. Playing Anhelo the Painter is just like this off-meta janky Grixis commander. Just because it does cool stuff with Beseech the Mirror, and I really like that card.
Card's good.
So shout out to the rest of the CDH team, my people helping me through that list. Thank you all so much. It's been a lot of fun to play. But even with that, like, right, your game plan sometimes is very evident from your opening hand, where it's like, all right, we're gonna go like cast ad nauseum as fast as possible with this hand, or like we're on an Underbrook Breach plan here. But I think, at least for me, I'm much more okay pitching away like quote unquote good hands for decks, in order to like sort of fit where I'm at in the pod. And I don't know that maybe that's something that other people do, but I feel like that's something that's not necessarily talked about, and that but that's just something I really considered like as a player. I'm like, all right, I'm in seat this. This is what the other decks at the table are. Um, we are going to need to, or I'm going to need to make sure that I am able to play around an early Winota because they're going before me, or I'm going to need to make sure that I have a counter spell for the turbo deck and they're going right after me, so I can still play a little greedy as long as like I know that I have at least one counter spell up to stop this. That's just something that I think about.
Yeah, I guess I also view, again, like there are ideas there that I think I always pull from. Like if Tivit's on the table or like Winota's on the table, I'm usually gonna mulligan for like Drannith Magistrate or something. Like I that is the one card that unless the hand is literally 7 non-lands and like one of those non-lands is Drannith, like I'll consider that one. I will strongly consider that one. It depends on what like the rest of the hand is. I guess I need like some amount like 1-drops. Like I want things to be able to cast. I guess I still am like holding on to that like regular EDH commander mentality of I have lands and spells, we'll just play it and we'll just jam it. And trying to take a step back and think more critically on like, okay, does this hand get there? Do I think this game plan is applicable? Do I think this hand is effective? Does this hand stop someone really hard? Are the questions that I frequently ask myself. Less so beyond, oh, I can actually like just cast things with this hand, and that's a hard trap to break out of, because I think a lot of the times, especially when you're playing like a pile sort of deck, you look at all these cards in your hand, you're like, yeah, all these cards are really good, and I can cast them. We're gonna absolutely keep them, but you have to take that a step further, I think, and that's been the thing that I've been trying to make sure that I do is like think through the hand. Think through the sequence. How does this interact? Where is my place on the table? Who's the beatdown? A lot of those questions.
Yes,
and that helps a lot. Like, have you gone back to read the Who's the Beatdown article recently? That article.
I feel like I reread that every 3 months. Not gonna lie.
That article's like, I found that article like a year into me playing Magic, and it is still relevant today. It is incredible. If you haven't read it, fuck it, I'll just put it in the description because everybody should read this.
Check it out in our Discord.
Absolutely.
We'll throw it in there too.
Absolutely. Check out the Discord as well. It is still to this day one of my favorite and most influential like Magic things that I've read, period. It's a
really good article.
It's very good. For those not in the know, it essentially poses the question of, okay, who's the aggressor in a matchup, in any given matchup, and who is the defending one? Because it's always going to be one player is going to be either or. And it's figuring out, okay, if you are playing control, you're not trying to beat the aggro deck by trying to play faster. You're trying to beat the aggro deck by playing control better. Flip side of that, if you're aggro, you're not trying to stop them landing there. You're not trying to stop them from turning the corner. You're trying to kill them before the corner even comes. So don't even think about trying to go to the long game. Your game plan is to kill immediately. If you're control, your game plan is to live long, because you are going to get there inevitably. They cannot.
Yep. Yeah. It's a really, really well written article, very easy to understand, and has some nice historical context with cards like Cursed Scroll and stuff like that. So you can read that. It'll be a little fun callback to anyone who might know some of the older cards. But yeah, I think you especially mentioned like mulliganing for Drannith, and that's like, I feel like that's a lot of like the way that I play, right? I'm like, okay, I'm sitting here with this control list. What do I need to answer the rest of the table? If I'm going earlier in rotation, it might just be like, I'm going to force out a Ristic Study, and then I'm just going to make people either not cast their spells when they want to, by having to wait at least a turn because of sphere resistance effect, right? Or they can, but I'm also going to go I'm going to go +1 on each -1 they do for cards, and that's also super okay with me most of the time, because I'm putting more resources in my hand that I can use to stop you. I went on this massive kick about a month back of, like, I don't know what it was, but I felt like all of my pods are super commander reliant, so I felt like every single game I was mulliganing down to like 5 or 4 even sometimes. I'm like, does this cast or get turn 1 or 2 Drannith Magistrate? And then
Not
and
good
that's
enough,
all.
Bucko. Not good
That's-
enough.
That's all I cared about. Is like just get Drannith turn 1, turn 2, and that card carried me through so many games because you throw that card down and everyone's like, well, I can't kill it because then if I kill it, the next person's gonna get their commander, and their commander is better than my commander because they're casting it without spending any resources. And so it's just like, yeah, I'll go down to 4 and cast this turn 1 Drannith Magistrate. And everyone's like, well, fuck.
Well, shit.
I guess
there
I'm
goes
not
the
killing it, and you're just like,
the
okay,
entire
cool.
game plan just out
Yeah,
the window.
yeah, you're just like, yeah, that's fine. I'm gonna top deck a land and play a land. I'm gonna top deck a tutor, play a tutor. I'm gonna top deck a this, play a that, and you just ride that and let that Drannith Magistrate sit there because everyone's so petrified of removing it.
No one can
because
touch it.
because I mean it's they're scared, but they have good reason to be because you can't remove it or the next guy wins. It's a weird card, that Drannith Magistrate.
Yeah. How matchups? So it sounds like matchups matter a lot for you when considering your mulligan.
Oh, super. I definitely have in my mind like matchup spreads. Like, all right, my deck pairs up really well against this list and pretty well against that list, but it's not very good against that list. But this other list in the pod matches up really well against them. So like, I can push them into fighting player 4 using their resources to drag them down. I can meanwhile focus on like 1v1ing player 2, and then like try and pull ahead this way. And so those are like the types of scenarios that I play out in my head, right? It's where I'm like developing alliances in my head before the game starts, or like developing something I do really frequently is I look at my hand and I have my first 2 turns plotted. Like it almost doesn't matter what my opponents do unless I top deck something crazy. Like unless the game state gets super scuffed out of nowhere. It's like I know what I'm going to do for the next 2 turns. I'm going to draw, I'm going to play a land, I'm going to cast this spell, and I'm going to cast that spell, and I'm going to pass. And then I'm going to draw a card, I'm going to play a land, I'm going to cast this spell, and I'm going to cast that spell, and I'm going to pass. And I just know exactly how my turns are going to go, barring somebody's doing something just wild.
Barring like a win attempt or like a crazy stacks piece or something,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm always trying to like live in the moment of my turns. I feel like I'm always trying to like figure things out as I'm going. As you can tell, I do that a lot. But even still, like I usually have some sort of rough game plan, some sort of like rough idea of like what I need to be trying to do at any given pod. More often than not, I'm usually trying to gauge essentially how fast people are going, I guess. I'm usually trying to figure out like, okay, this deck's going to try and establish this first. This deck's going to try and like go for a win first. This deck is totally okay with like just kind of sitting it back and then running from there. I don't pregame any of my politics. I think I've said this in the past. I still think that's wild that you pregame your politics.
Basically. I lock and load moves before I even sit down at the table, man. No, but it's I don't know. I feel like I try to live in the moment sometimes, but also like you all make it so hard on yourselves by playing these decks that play at different speeds. I know when I sit down at any table, I know who the beatdown is, and it's not me.
It's never
I
you.
am playing control.
It's never you. It's never you.
I want that game to go to time. That's where I'm at.
And that's why we deny you card draw. That's why we stomp on your value engines. Guys, no, I need the control magic.
I was playing a practice game with some of our peoples the other night, and I had a turn 2 Rhystic Study, and it got Pyroblasted on turn 3 or 4, and then I cast a One Ring 2 turns later, and that immediately got countered, but someone else resolved a One Ring like that same turn or the turn before.
Yeah,
it was just like, and then I did something else, and I think I opted a Sisse activation. I captured Italian, and people were talking about like, maybe we counter kill this Italian. I was like, guys, please let me have something. Just give me a toy.
Something, guys. I promise. I'm not gonna misuse it. I'm just gonna draw like 5 cards. It'll be fine. I
swear.
Don't worry about it. No.
Yeah.
It's always an ongoing thing. Like I want to get better at politics. I am getting better at politics, and like trying to like factor that into my hands is always like a weird thing. It's just not a skill I've like fully cultivated or like understood like how to employ.
Yeah, I think factoring politics into mulligans is something that's like really weird, and I wouldn't recommend that people try to do it for the most part because I don't really think it works. I wouldn't say that I try and combine politics with my mulligans.
Yeah.
So much as like
instead of
I
like
like
one
tr- I
dictating
like-
one, you're just
I draw like
Yeah.
parallels, if
Mhm.
that makes sense. Where it's
Okay.
like in my
Okay.
mind, I'm like, all right, this hand does this, and this player likes that, which means that I'm going to be able to make them an ally. And like this hand does this, and this player doesn't like it. But because that player doesn't like it so much, the other two players are totally on board with it, even though it's not good for them.
Yeah.
Like that style of thing.
Okay.
And so it's
Okay,
like
that
those
makes
types
sense.
of things,
That
right?
makes sense then.
Where it's like what's a good way? What's a good example? It's like Winota and Tivit, right? Like me, Winota, Tivit, and like Rogside. I have like turn on Ristic Study and Tivit has Force of Will, or like Winota's going before me and they have Red Blast or something. It's like obviously Ristic not good for them. They do not like it. But also like
It's so much
you can
worse.
make an
for,
argument there.
for
You can be
the
like,
wrong
guys,
side deck.
Rogside likes it so much
Yeah.
less than you. Just let it resolve.
Mhm.
And maybe they play balls to the walls into it, but then you also have your counterspell still, and they have to fight into a Ristic Study. Just let it happen. And sometimes like that style of thinking, right? Where you can be like, just let this ride and force the other players to play around it. Because it hurts you less than it hurts the other. And they're like, and a lot of times that works. And people are that makes sense. I can play around this card. Other people can't play around this card, so I guess I'm okay with it for now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. That's it's definitely a dynamic of the game that I haven't really considered. I guess because I hesitate to say like I'm trying to be ignorant of the rest of the table because I'm always super conscious of my actions of the table. But like a lot of the times, like anytime I'm trying to jam something, I'm like, this is like you're either gonna stop me here or like it's gonna resolve. But also half the time, the stuff I'm trying to resolve are creatures, so you're gonna counterspell this. What counterspells? Removal?
Yeah.
Never heard of her. You know, kind of those deals. Like I'm looking to be the big threat at the table. Usually is what I want to do. I like being in that power position. I think I had a game a while ago. Like I untapped and I had like Pod plus Vivian plus Dockside. My hand was just stacked. And I was just like, okay, we're gonna turn the corner, and I am now gonna be arch enemy. And I think I tried to win over the course of 3 turn cycles, like 4 or 5 different times in like three different ways. I got there eventually, just because like I landed both a Pod and a Vivian, and I had everything in rotation, plus Emil Dockside still waiting it back up. So I think I'm usually trying to always be the beatdown. I think my hands generally dictate that. I think Jake once like, you're not a control deck. Like you can keep reactive hands, you can play the reactive game, but you're not the control deck. Like that's not your role here. Like I agree with that to an extent, and it's really hard to try and like wield that, specifically when you're not having blue. But like, no guys, like please, I am fine drawing cards. Like yes, I'm gonna get my win attempts, blah 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 blah. But I have so much interaction that you can't deal with the things that I can deal with. Y'all are gonna be more than capable of handling the things that I can't. So let me handle the stuff that you can't. You know. And that's a harder thing to try and like get people on board with, I think.
Definitely. I think it was phrased really well. I was talking with one of our players that we know, Tyler Myers, great player. And they were telling me that sometimes you have the counterspell, right? And there's a stacks piece that's hitting the table that you really, really hate. Like you're playing a Dockside deck or something, and someone's putting a Nora on the stack, and you have the counterspell for it. And no one else does. And you want to counter it so bad, but also like sometimes it doesn't, like you just let it hit and it doesn't matter because someone else as long as you know that someone else is gonna need or want to remove that later, like they'll take care of it for you.
Mm-hmm.
And you can then capitalize on it. Like, sometimes you just even if it's bad for you, you just let it happen. And after hearing that, it really helped me like sculpt my starting hands. It's like, okay, I have one counterspell. And it's like, okay, I'm not gonna snap this swan song on a blind obedience just because like I really want my Dockside to work. Yeah, I really want my Dockside to work right off the bat. Maybe at this point it's better to just fold it and like wait until something that matters goes on the stack, like a Thoracle that goes on the stack next turn. Like the Thoracle consult and you swan song with consult or whatever.
Or like an ensuing or inevitable counter spell war that's gonna happen.
Yes. But then at the same time, I feel like it's also it's a double-edged sword. It's a dangerous path to walk, a slippery slope, because then you get into this mindset of like, oh well, like that's bad, but something worse might come along. Oh, well, that's also really bad, especially with that thing, but something else might come along. And, like, you just keep kicking the can down the road, and then eventually, you're just being smothered by all these value engines and stack pieces and blah, 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 and you still haven't cast, like, your interaction piece just because you wanted to save it for the next worst thing, right?
Yeah, you're denying holding the answer in your hand. Not even for oh my god, not even for like priority reasons. Just like I don't know when to use this, or like the window is so far gone
or something. Yeah. And so I feel like that's the other thing. It's like sometimes it is also correct to just force a negation someone's blind obedience. Based like if you're the only deck that's like an artifact centric deck, and the other two decks at the table are green and someone's casting their blind obedience, sometimes you just force a negation that instead of waiting. No, yeah, sometimes you just force a negation that. If you're the only artifact deck, right? Like that card can only punish you and no one else cares about removing it. Ever.
Well, I mean,
like
I guess in certain instances,
you just
like
hit
creatures
that, right?
Tapped, like
Yeah, I think like there are certain times where it's like, all right, this is my moment. You have to. It's really hard to gauge those, especially early in the game.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a decision that like that's like it's a discipline that really only comes with time. I think like that kind of like this counter spell is squarely going to be used to push me ahead specifically. Like you can't be there's a balance to like the amount of greed I think you can hold with your interactive pieces, like be it removal spells or counter spells or whatever. Like there is a certain level. I guess counter spells are going to be more like you can play more greedy. No. Removal spells you can play greedy because you can like end step try and kill something to try and set up your window. I take that back. It's pretty similar but on different axes. Yes. Where you can use this to your advantage, but at the same time, like you either have to be so sure or like 100% or like you are opening up the table to taking to seat 3 essentially.
Yeah, overly greedy counterspellers are my absolute nightmare. They're like, yes, I know that they're doing XYZ thing, but I'm going to save my counterspell to defend my win attempt. And you're just like, if this spell resolves, we don't lose now, but the game is over. Yeah. Like, and I think that's something that people just don't see either, which is just so frustrating. It's like, it's that macro play that like long-term vision where you're looking like 6 turns later and it's like, it doesn't matter that this doesn't kill us because we're losing to it now in 6 rotations, and the game will not be over before that. And people are like, "No, I'm gonna save it. Like, no, please, you don't understand."
I guess it's similar with like removal in an aspect because like when you have removal, like you are the person that's supposed to be like strategically answering the stacks pieces for the table. Like that is your primary function, is to relieve key players at key moments of specific stacks pieces or specifically to stop creature combos. Because like, sure, nice Force of Will in hand. I resolved the birthing pod like a turn or 2 beforehand. Like Force of Will doesn't do anything against pod activation, you know?
Yeah.
And so we have to be ready for those things, or like being able to, like I said, alleviate certain people of their stacks pieces, which is a big level up moment for me, is like making sure that even though I have my finger on the button, knowing who to press the button for.
Yeah, that's another really hard thing to gauge too.
Mulligans are tough. Mulligans are very tough because like games change so fast and they're so dynamic. Like you can have like the most rock solid like 7, 5 good 6s, you know, and like over the course of 2 turns you go, yes, this hand was the worst thing in the world to keep.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've definitely been like, all right, I'm going to cast this turn 1, like, 1 ring or Mystic Study or something like that, and the next turn it's like Collect Roof or Rule of Law or something, and you're just like, wow, this hand
was the worst
is so
thing.
bad.
Yeah.
I cannot believe that I kept this now knowing what I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so things like that, just awful, feel bad moments. But, I mean, it also goes the flip side, too, right? You're like, I guess I'll keep this 4. It's kind of, like, risky, but I guess it could work in theory, and then, like, on turn 3, you rip the Oxide Extortionist off the top, and the count is like 6, and you're like, oh, well, I'm just gonna win the game now. Yeah, sometimes that just happens too. It's like, wow, variance.
Yeah. Do you change your mulligans at all when you're in different seats? Because I feel like I definitely do.
Definitely.
I try and keep faster hands if I'm going like first or second. That's why I kind of start off with like my first or second seat decisions are substantially different from my like third or fourth seat positions, because I feel like with my first and second seats, I'm looking to try and win faster, generally
Yeah.
speaking, or I'm looking to, I guess maybe not like win directly. I'm looking to establish a dominant position early.
Yeah, I
And
think
oh, go ahead.
from a control perspective, I still value like what my role is, like what cards I need to answer the other decks more than like necessarily am I the aggressor or am I the defender? Because I'm always the defender. But that said, sometimes I'll be in seat 1 and I'll be like, all right, I'm gonna catch, or seat 2 and I'll keep a really explosive hand, right? But sometimes also like sometimes I'm in seat 4 and I'm like, okay, I know that this is turn 1 risk study and seat 4 is not going to be amazing because people, if they want to, can always just play around it. But then also, if they play around it for 1 turn, they're kind of stuck playing around it for the rest of the game.
Yeah, you just catch up there.
Yeah, and so you're able to catch up from seat 4, and it's like, and so I know that if I'm doing that, like my really explosive hand is all it's doing is serve to slow down the game, which is something I'm okay with because I'm in seat 4, right? So it goes back to like I'll joke, like, you can change the turn order if someone goes really deep on a mulligan, right? They're like, man, I'm going to 4, and they're just like got the most distraught look on their face. They're going, oh man, this hand sucks. Like, I haven't drawn anything off of all my cards. And you're like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm not actually going 4th. I'm going 3rd now.
like, oh, just cool. This hand can afford to do nothing.
Yeah, right? Or you get a Gemstone Caverns in seat 2, and you actually just went 1st. You didn't go second. You actually went 1st.
Oh god, what a glorious feeling, Gemstone. Okay, what's the percentage of times that you just like see Gemstone Caverns, you're like, oh, I'm not going 1st? Yeah, this hand's instantly a keeper. Or like, do you instantly go? How much does it change when you see Gemstone Caverns when you're not going 1st?
It definitely has a substantial impact. Like, I'm probably keeping about 60% of the hands that can start with a gemstone in play, at least, if not more. Just like at base, right? Because you're starting with an extra land in play, and that's huge because it taps for any color. But also, like, I've definitely thrown hands back where it's like, all right, Gemstone Caverns and a Mana Crypt, let's go. Oh wait, this hand doesn't do it.
And that's one of the things that has been the weirdest revelation for me, is like, oh man, this hand's great. And you go, yep, this hand's great.
Yeah, trap hands, you gotta be so careful about this.
Doesn't do anything. Or like, the worst is like when I have like a lot of land and removal, and I'm just like, cool, this hand just answers anything. The pod does not need me to answer everything. Like, this is terrible.
You need something to advance your own game plan. Like, you gotta have one piece of action at least, I feel like.
Yeah.
Unless you're in seat 3 or 4, and like you're already going low while other people might have kept higher hands, and at that point you're like starting to get to the point where, all right, well, I guess I just need to be able to answer something to shut down someone else, so I might be able to draw into action at that point. And that's the hardest part, honestly, is just figuring that out.
Yeah. The man, this hand is cracked. Wait a minute. On second glance, look at the table. Who's in the pod? Yeah, never mind. This hand doesn't do anything. It's such a rough feeling, but I feel like if you can reach that conclusion on like your hand, like that in and of itself is a great skill to like have, because it means that you are thinking things through a couple of turns in advance. You're trying to see the ways that things are going to play out. Like, sometimes you have 2 turbo decks at the table, and you're like, this hand is exactly land removal, and my commander does not draw me cards at all, or very little cards at that. We're just going to have to hope that this is good, and we'll figure out how we're going to win the game later on. But for right now, we're focusing on not losing.
Yeah, because I know that for my list at least, there are a number of times where it's like, okay, this hand's really good. Got like a Ranger Captain on turn 2, followed by like proceeding with a Mana Door. Oh my god, this hand's so good. And then you look at it, you look at the table, and you're like,
creature decks.
These are all creature-based decks. This hand doesn't do anything. Like, even if the Ranger Captain was good, even then, like, it still might not do anything. Like, you're like,
the amount of times I'm like, oh,
throw it back.
The amount of times I'm like, oh, yeah, Birthing Pod plus Pyroblast? Hell yeah. Wait a minute. There is one blue pod, and I am going after the person that they need to respond. This Pyroblast doesn't do anything here. It just doesn't do anything here.
Yeah.
Like, oh no, it's going to blow up a Ristic Study. No. We need to keep the Ristic Study around for a little while longer because we don't have the tools to deal with things on the stack. Can't do that. Gotta let the blue player play a little bit, unfortunately. I know, cringe.
It's a really interesting thing for sure. I think that it definitely gets easier over time,
Definitely,
but
definitely.
it's just such a hard thing to get into the mindset of in the first place, where you're like, all right, I want to mulligan better. And then, at least for me, it was the case, like, I want to mulligan better. And then you see, like, 7 mediocre cards, and you're like,
Oh god.
this is, I'll keep it. And then you lose and to someone who mulled the 4, and you're like,
What the fuck?
come on, man, how is that possible? I have more cards in my hand.
It almost feels like correct or symbolic, and you're like, okay, my mulligans have been slipping, or I need to start like getting good at my mulligans. I'm gonna start taking them considerably. And it's like, for 5 games in a row, you are going to mull to 5, and that is going to be the worst set of 5 that you see every time. Also, 2 of your mulligans were no landers, no rocks, so you have to mulligan them anyway. And it's just like, oh my fuck, is this even worth considering? It always is worth considering, because it is one of the most direct ways that you can contribute to the game, that you can improve your own gameplay, because this is literally how you are starting the game. Like, you have a choice in that. You have a way to not necessarily sculpt your hand, but you have control over it. And having control over those things means you can start to pick and choose. You can start to figure things out from there. And it's great. It's a fundamental skill for a reason. I remember, like, when I started doing like 60 card mulligan, like trying to mulligan better, like that. I feel like that ends up being more like matchups, and like that's gonna matter like games 2, game 3 more so than anything else. But even still, like going game 1 blind, like there's still a skill to, okay, no, this hand like does a decent amount, or like this hand can answer something, or like it you have a good hand versus you know what a good hand is versus you know what a bad hand is, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So, it's all just player skill.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think the real skill difference is we're out of things to talk about. We've mulliganed down to 0 here, I think.
No cards in hand.
No cards in hand. We have top decked. Like, what's the best like top deck when you mull to 0? Like Mana Crypt?
Command Tower.
Actually, yeah, Command Tower is actually the real answer, because from there, like, all your 1-drops turn on. Yeah, that's the correct answer, I think.
Command Tower.
Yeah. Yeah. No, actually, it's not Command Tower. Everybody knows the best top deck is Gemstone Caverns.
Yes, that is never a sad land.
God, holy shit. The amount of times I see that card drawn, I'm like, why am I running this stupid fucking card? And then I win games off, I'm like, that's why we run this stupid fucking card.
Yeah, card's good.
Alright, well, I want to thank everybody for listening. Atlas, as always, fantastic conversations. Always a good
fun.
Always a good time. To our listeners, if you haven't joined the Discord yet, please join. It's a good time. Good time.
Get some conversation started in there. Nothing too crazy yet, but we do have a channel for submissions, so we'll ask for more input on episode topics and things like that.
Yeah.
And then, if you're interested in supporting the channel, we got a Patreon now, so you can check that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do want to plug the submissions channel in the Discord. I do have like a small library of music. Please, if you have like good, like chill music that's royalty free, I'm always looking for new music. I'm always looking for like ways to make the show better, topics, ideas, anything. Please, I want to use this Discord as a way for us to be able to communicate with you, our audience, because I want to make the show better. And the only way I can do that is by getting feedback. And yeah, that's all I gotta say on that. We'll catch you next time.